If I smiled at the right moments, nodded at the right words, maybe my family would stop pretending I was the mistake they never meant to have. But silence has a weight. It collects in your chest until one day, it cracks something inside you, tonight, at that dinner table. With their polished glasses and perfect laughter, I felt it break. The kind of break that doesn't make a sound, but changes everything. My name is Evania Brooks, and after tonight, I'm done swallowing what they serve as truth. They think they still know who I am. They don't. Not anymore. I had sworn I'd never come back to Stonehill Estate, but when my mother's message arrived, "Grandfather wants to see you for Christmas," I found myself driving through the Oregon fog anyway. The radio hummed Silent Night, the kind that sounds lonelier when you're the only one listening. Ahead, the vineyard lights flickered gold, the house rising from the mist like a fortress pretending to be warm. I parked 2 driveways away. My old sedan didn't belong in their picture-perfect world. Inside, laughter floated through the halls, brittle and rehearsed. Guests sparkled in sequined dresses, men in tailored suits. The chandelier above the dining table caught the red of the wine, turning it into something almost bloody. My mother's voice sliced through the air before I reached my seat. "Evania! You could have worn something brighter for the holiday." My father's laugh followed, heavy and practiced. He clapped my shoulder too hard, telling everyone, "That's my daughter, the independent one." The word landed like a jab wrapped in charm. I smiled because I always do, even when it hurts. Then the sound of a cane tapped against the marble floor. The room fell still. Grandfather stood in the doorway, silver hair, dark coat, presents too large for the space. My mother's hand trembled around her glass. My father forced a smile. "Didn't expect me to show up?" he said softly. "Seems you're all getting along just fine without me." When the main course arrived, his voice carried again, low but clear. "Still living in the house I bought you, Evania?" Every fork froze mid-air. The quartet in the corner stopped playing. I felt the room tilt, my throat close. I managed to whisper, "I never had a house." "Grandpa." The wine slipped from my mother's hand, spreading red across the white linen like a wound. My father's eyes burned through me. Grandfather leaned back, studying their faces. "Interesting," he murmured. "I sent the money 3 years ago." No one breathed. In a family built on wine and reputation, it only took one honest question for the cracks to finally show. And in my grandfather's steady, piercing gaze, I saw it. Something shifting. Something about to break. The morning after the dinner felt heavier than the night before. I woke to the smell of coffee and the low murmur of voices drifting from the kitchen downstairs. My parents spoke in the kind of hush that always meant something ugly was being wrapped in polite words. "If he remembers that money, we're done." "He won't. Just act normal." Their words crawled up the staircase and settled in my chest. I didn't wait for breakfast. By the time the house came alive, I was already on the road back to Portland, the fog clearing just enough to see the wet asphalt glint like broken glass. The world looked calm on the surface, but every reflection screamed storm. When I reached my building, a thick envelope waited in the mailbox. Brooks Family Office stamped in dark blue wax. My name curved neatly across the front. Inside lay a copy of a wire transfer. $500,000. Note reading for Evania Brooks Home Fund, signed Harrison Brooks. The paper trembled in my hands. 3 years of scraping rent, of fixing leaks and eating leftovers, and all that time they'd been telling me I wasn't trying hard enough. Tears came. Not from sadness, but from realizing I'd been fooled for so long. I remembered the day they bought the house by the lake. They called it an investment for the family, I joked. "When do I get to live there?" My father smiled without looking up. "When you learn how to keep a house." Back then I laughed it off. Now the memory burned like acid. That house, my grandfather's supposed gift, had become their trophy. I drove to the edge of town that afternoon, up the hill where the old vineyard manager, Rudy, lived. His cottage smelled like oak and thyme. When he saw me, His eyes softened with the kind of pity that already knew too much. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small envelope yellowed at the edges. My name was still clear on the seal. Your grandfather sent this the year he left. Your mother told me not to deliver it. Inside was a wooden keychain, initials E.B., carved deep into the grain. That night, I typed the address etched into the key. The map zoomed in on a lakeside property, now listed as Brooks Lakeside Retreat, wine tours and tastings. My throat tightened. The house my grandfather bought for me had been turned into business for them. I shut the laptop. The reflection staring back at me wasn't the same girl who'd smiled through the dinner. It was someone who had stopped pretending. They'd built their empire on lies. I'd just found the first crack. I didn't sleep. The next morning, rain brushed the window like static. The envelope, the key, the letter. They sat on my kitchen table like witnesses waiting to testify. I dialed my mother before I could lose my nerve. Did grandfather send money to buy me a house? Her voice was sugar over steel. What did you read? Some things are better left unspoken. Sweetheart, don't go stirring old dust. The line went quiet until my father's voice cut in. You should be grateful we've supported you when you had nothing. I said it before I could stop myself. You mean with money that wasn't yours? There was a click, then silence. The hum of jazz from the cafe below seeped through the walls. Notes that once calmed me now felt like noise. I stared at the dark screen of my phone, breathing hard. The city's gray light pressing through the blinds. Outside, the rain turned heavier. I thought about how easy it had always been for them to twist guilt into love, control into concern. I'd spent my whole childhood performing obedience just to earn peace, and still, it was never enough. Then the phone rang again. Unknown number. The voice on the other end was tired but steady. It's me, Evania. We need to talk. Tomorrow, grandfather. I closed my eyes, my heart racing with something between fear and relief. He knew. And if he knew, everything was about to change. That night, I gathered the envelope, the key, and the unopened letter from Rudy. I placed them in a wooden box and lit a candle on the counter. The flame flickered, painting the room in golden shadow. They say blood runs thicker than water. Maybe so. But sometimes, the truth cuts deeper than both. Rain threaded down the Portland skyline, soft but relentless. 3 knocks echoed against my door, slow and measured. When I opened it, grandfather stood in the hallway, coat damp, cane in hand, eyes sharper than I remembered. He stepped inside, scanning the cracked ceiling, the broken heater, the dishes stacked in the sink. His gaze stopped on the peeling wall paint. His fingers brushed it, coming away wet. You live like this? For now, I told him. I'm saving to move. His jaw tensed. I sent enough for you to live well. They lied. At my kitchen table, he unfolded a list of transfers, his neat handwriting steady even as his hand trembled. 500,000 for a home, he murmured. 200,000 for an education trust. They said you graduated. Where's the photo? I shook my head. I never did. He pulled out his phone and showed me a picture of me in a cap and gown, a photo that had never existed. Someone had cut and pasted my smile onto a stranger's body. They made this. I whispered. He nodded. And they'll keep making lies until someone stops them. He wrote dates and names on a napkin. We'll start with Stonehill's books. From now on, I trust what I see, not what I love. When I asked why he hadn't come sooner, he said quietly, because I thought they loved you the way I loved my son. I was wrong. He looked up, eyes hardening. Tomorrow night, we return to Stonehill. Tell no one. When the door closed behind him, the room felt smaller. Outside, the rain hit harder against the glass, each drop like a warning. After that dinner, Christmas was over. What came next would be Judgment Day. Stonehill slept under snow and silence. Grandfather's lantern threw trembling light along the stone walls of the wine cellar. Rows of barrels lined the dark like sentinels of pride and deceit. He stopped before one marked Legacy Reserve and pried loose a brick from the floor. Beneath it, a small iron safe waited. Inside, a transfer receipt signed by Celeste Brooks, a loan agreement using the Lake Oswego house as collateral, and a note, transfer remainder to C&B Holdings. My mother's name was everywhere. Then footsteps. My parents appeared in the doorway, faces ghost pale. My mother's voice cracked. "We did this for you." "For me?" I asked. While I lived off instant noodles, my father's anger broke through his fear. "He always chose you. You think any of this would exist without us?" Grandfather's voice cut the air. "You stole from her, then called it love. You forged papers and called it family." He struck his cane against the floor. "Bring every document by morning, or lose it all." They stood frozen, small beneath the flickering light. I watched them, not as their daughter, but as witness. For the first time, I saw them afraid, not of losing wealth, but of facing the truth they'd buried for years. 3 days after the night in the cellar, Stonehill gleamed again. Flowers replaced, silver polished, servants pretending not to hear the tension that pulsed through every breath. Grandfather called it a family meeting. But the legal folders lining the dining table told another story. No one touched their wine. The chandelier light caught the red liquid, motionless. Grandfather's voice cut through the silence, calm but cold. "This isn't a celebration. It's an audit of conscience." Marion Hale entered with a file tucked under her arm. "I've reviewed the last 5 years of Stonehill's accounts," she said. The $500,000 meant for Evania's home went to C&B Holdings, an account owned by Celeste and Grant Brooks. The room cracked open. My mother's hand shook on her glass. My father leaned forward, jaw tight. "We did it for the company. Without us, you'd have nothing left. The company doesn't need deceit to survive," Grandfather answered. Tears streaked my mother's face. "We only wanted to keep the Brooks name alive." "The name died long before I did," I said quietly. Grandfather stood, his shadow stretching across the table. "Grant and Celeste Brooks are suspended from all operations until the investigation ends. Marion will serve as trustee." My father slammed his palm on the table. "You're destroying my life's work for a girl who ran away." Grandfather's reply landed like a verdict. "I'm restoring what my son lost, his honor." He turned to me. "Until further notice, Evania will represent Stonehill." Power shifted in the room, silent but final. Marion read from her notes. Celeste's message to accounting. "Harrison's not coming back. Transfer the funds immediately." My mother broke down. My father's stare went blank. Grandfather's tone softened, but not his words. If they lied about a house, they could lie about anything. That night, headlights sliced through the storm as my father drove away. I stood by the window, watching the vines bow under wind and snow. They lost their dignity. I lost my family. No one won. "Behind me," Grandfather whispered to Marion. "Review the will. I want nothing left undone." A week later, Marion and I searched the archives beneath Stonehill. Dust clung to every file. The light flickered as we found a folder marked Property, Lake Oswego, 2019. Inside, one forged deed. The signature said Harrison Brooks, but the pen strokes screamed fraud. Marion's face hardened. "Forging, this is a federal crime," she said. Hours later, my mother called, begging to meet alone. In the glass conservatory, she wept under the rain. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Your father handled everything." Marion's voice stayed cold. "When you sign a lie, you become part of it." My father came to her office that night, shouting, pounding on locked doors until security pulled him away. The arrogance was gone, only fear remained. Later, he found me in the winery. Between the barrels, the air smelled of oak and guilt. "You think he'll hand it all to you?" he sneered. "He just wants to punish me. He wants fairness," I said. He laughed bitterly. "He never loved anyone but himself. Maybe that's where you learned it." He froze, then turned away. For the first time, he didn't fight. Before sunrise, Marion called. Grandfather was awake. Papers covered his desk. Firelight trembled against his tired face. "I've rewritten the will," he said. "If they betray me again, everything goes where it belongs. Tomorrow, it becomes official." As I left his room, wind screamed through the vineyards. My mother sat alone in the corridor, face pale beneath the lamplight. "Hate me if you must," she said softly. "Just don't let him turn you into his reflection." I met her eyes. I'm not trying to be him. I'm trying to be me. When I turned away, candlelight flickered over the family portraits. For an instant, it looked like the painted faces trembled, waiting for the storm to finally break. The law office smelled faintly of paper and antiseptic. The walls were glass, the light too bright, reflecting every nervous breath back at us. Grandfather sat at the head of the conference table, his cane resting against the chair. I sat beside him, across from us. My parents waited like strangers on trial. The only sound in the room was the clock ticking and the shallow rhythm of his breathing. Marion Hale set a thick file on the table and spoke with her usual precision. According to the revised will, dated December 12th, all holdings of Stonehill Winery, the Lake Oswego Estate, and the Ashland Land Trust are to be transferred to Evania Brooks. Silence fractured the room. My father shot to his feet, face flushed. "You can't do this!" Grandfather didn't flinch. "I already have." My mother's tears welled, trembling in her eyes. My father's voice rose. "You're punishing us because you believed her, because she made you feel guilty." She tried to hush him, but he snapped, raw and reckless. "You forged the signature. I just did what he would have done." Marion pressed a small button on her recorder. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks." The words hung like a verdict. Grandfather's face turned pale. His hand trembled as he gripped the cane. "I built this name with my hands," he whispered, "and you turned it into filth." He tried to stand, but his knees gave way. The sound of his fall tore through the silence. Papers scattered across the floor like broken promises. I dropped beside him, feeling the warmth drain from his fingers as he whispered, barely breathing, "Find the second ledger, in the cellar." Outside, sirens wailed through the winter air, their red lights flashing across the glass walls. I held him, my tears silent, heavy as confession. The truth was finally out, and it had taken the only man who ever believed me to bring it into the light. Snow still fell over Stonehill when Marion and I went back into the cellar. Half the power was out, the air thick with cold and the faint scent of oak. Behind the legacy reserve barrels, my flashlight caught a crack in the wall, small, deliberate. I pressed my fingers into the seam, and a loose stone shifted. From the hollow came a leather-bound book, its cover etched with fading letters. Ledger 2, Ashland Trust. Dust drifted in the air as I opened it. Page after page showed transfers, deeds, and bank slips, everyone tied to land in Ashland, everyone in my name. My grandfather had created a trust for me years ago. They had hidden it, buried it under greed. At the end of the ledger was a folded sheet. Trust termination letter. My signature sprawled across the bottom, except it wasn't mine. Marion ran a UV light over the ink. The pen pressure, the tilt. It was forged. Her voice was calm but sharp. "This isn't family betrayal anymore. This is a federal crime." She photographed every page, forwarding them straight to the investigators. The next morning, I stood beside grandfather's bed. His face was pale, but his eyes still burned with that quiet authority. "Did you find it?" he asked. "I did," I said. He reached for the pen, hand trembling, and signed the legal transfer. "Don't let justice end things. Evania. Let it start something better." A week later, the verdict came down in a downtown courtroom. My parents stood silent as the judge's gavel struck. "The Ashland Land Trust," he declared, "belongs to Evania Brooks." Outside, the winter wind swept through the streets. Reporters shouted my name. Cameras flashed, but I didn't look back. Justice didn't bring joy. It brought air, space, the ability to breathe again. A year later, the hills of Ashland were green again. Morning mist floated over the valley, soft as breath, the sun breaking through in pale gold ribbons. The vineyards that once stood ruined were growing back, rows of new vines winding across the slopes. I stepped out from the porch of the cedar house we built here, the Ashland Home Project. Inside, laughter mixed with the hum of sewing machines and the smell of bread rising in the ovens. Women talked over steaming coffee, their hands steady, their voices strong. By the door, I hung a small wooden sign. For the women who rebuild their homes, every nail in the walls, every plank in the floor came from something lost, repurposed, made whole again. In the living room, sunlight poured over the framed photograph of grandfather. The oak frame was carved with words I'd chosen myself, still living in the house he bought me. I poured 2 cups of cocoa, one for me, one for him, and set his on the table beside the photo. My voice caught quietly in the morning light. I'm home now, Grandpa. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall. The women and their children ran into the yard, arms lifted to catch the flakes. I stood in the doorway watching them, warmth blooming against the cold. The house he bought me was gone long ago, but losing it taught me how to build something real, made of trust, kindness, and truth. The camera would pull back then, the house glowing gold against the white hills, light spilling across Ashland as the wind carried laughter into the dawn.